You ever see your life fall apart in slow motion? Not in some dramatic, world-ending way, but in a way so subtle, so perfectly cruel, that you almost have to admire how the universe delivered it. That was me, standing in the middle of an intersection, watching my wife's car totaled against a light pole, paramedics swarming, and a man I'd never seen before clutching his ribs in the passenger seat. For 7 years, I had what most people would call a perfect marriage. Rachel and I met in college, fell into an easy, natural love, and built a life together that, from the outside, looked solid. We had a nice house in the suburbs, a shared bank account, dinner dates every Friday, and inside jokes that only made sense to us. We weren't just married. We were a team. At least, that's what I thought. Rachel worked in event planning, which meant late nights, weekend shifts, and sudden emergencies that needed her attention. At first, I didn't question it. I loved that she was passionate about her career. But looking back, I should have seen the signs. The nights when she came home too happy, too glowing, like she had just spent the best night of her life, without me. The last-minute cancellations of our plans. The way her phone was always on silent, flipped upside down whenever I walked into the room. But I trusted her. So when I got the call that she had been in a minor car accident, my first reaction wasn't panic. It was concern. I dropped everything, rushed to the scene, thinking about nothing except making sure my wife was okay. What I wasn't expecting. The half-dressed man in the passenger seat. Rachel's car was smashed into a pole, the front completely crumpled. A few bystanders stood around, murmuring, watching as paramedics checked her over. She looked fine, shaken, but fine. Then my eyes landed on him. A man, shirt half unbuttoned, belt undone, sitting next to her like he belonged there, like he had been in that seat 1,000 times before. And that's when it hit me. Rachel wasn't just in an accident. She was on her way home from somewhere she shouldn't have been. And now? I was about to find out just how deep this betrayal went. The scene around me blurred. People were talking. Sirens were wailing. But I wasn't hearing any of it. My entire focus was locked onto Rachel and the man sitting next to her, his shirt wrinkled, his hair a mess, his expression a mix of pain and pure panic. He looked at me like a deer caught in headlights, and that's when I knew. This wasn't just a car accident. This was a disaster of her own making. The paramedics were checking them over, moving fast but calm. I watched as one of them helped Rachel out of the car, guiding her toward an ambulance, checking for injuries. She wasn't bleeding, wasn't limping, wasn't even particularly shaken. She was just standing there, frozen, staring at me like she was calculating exactly how bad this looked. And the longer she stayed silent, the worse it got. Then, they pulled the guy out. And that's when I saw it. His belt was undone. I felt something inside me snap. Not just anger, something worse, something heavier. The realization that the life I thought I had, it was already over. The woman I trusted, the woman I built a life with, had wrecked everything, literally. And this idiot sitting next to her? He was just the proof. The paramedics started asking questions, going through their checklist. Was she dizzy? Was she hurt? Did she remember what happened? Rachel nodded mechanically, answering them like she was on autopilot, but she wasn't looking at them. She was looking at me, like she already knew there was no talking her way out of this. Then, an officer walked up and started taking statements. That's when the full picture started coming together. Apparently, she had been speeding, lost control, hit the pole. The police checked the car for signs of alcohol, nothing. But when they asked where she was coming from, she hesitated. Just for a second. And that's when the officer's eyes shifted. Because hesitation means a lie is coming. I didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, letting it all unfold, watching as she fumbled for an answer, watching as she tried to hold onto the last shreds of the life she had already burned down. Then the officer turned to me, asked me if I was her husband. I nodded. His face shifted slightly, not sympathy, not yet, just understanding, like he had seen this before, like he already knew exactly what was going on. Do you know the man in the car with her? He asked. That's when I finally spoke. No, I said, voice flat. But I'd love to. The officer looked between me and the guy who still hadn't said a word. Maybe he sensed the tension, because he took a step back, gestured for me to follow him away from the scene. I walked with him, feeling Rachel's eyes on me, feeling the weight of what was coming next. Because this wasn't just a betrayal. This was an exposure. She didn't get to choose how this ended anymore. And I was going to make sure she lost everything. I followed the officer a few steps away, my heart pounding, my vision sharp and clear like I was watching a movie instead of living it. The whole scene played out in slow motion. Rachel standing there, arms crossed, too stiff, too rehearsed, trying to hold herself together while the paramedics checked her for injuries she didn't have. The guy, let's call him Mystery Man, leaning against the crumpled car, avoiding eye contact, his belt still loose, his hands twitching like he was resisting the urge to fix it in front of everyone. I already knew what had happened. I didn't need an explanation. Rachel didn't need an elaborate excuse. I had all the evidence I needed right in front of me. The officer cleared his throat, glancing back at them before speaking. Listen, I'm not here to start drama. I've been doing this long enough to recognize certain situations. His voice was calm, professional, but there was something else in it too. Disgust, maybe. Pity, definitely. He tilted his head toward the wreck. Is that your car? I nodded. Mine and my wife's. Right. He sighed, running a hand over his notepad, then asked the real question. Do you know where she was coming from tonight? That was it. The moment Rachel's perfect little world officially collapsed. Because I didn't lie. I didn't cover for her. I didn't soften the blow. I just told the truth. No clue, I said. But judging by her passenger, I'd say not from work. The officer exhaled through his nose, scribbling something down. That's what I thought. That was when Rachel finally snapped. She must have seen us talking, must have known exactly what was being said, because before I could process it, she was storming over, her voice tight and shaky, desperation creeping in. This is ridiculous, she said, too loudly, trying to sound composed but failing miserably. It was just a ride home. He's a coworker, for God's sake. Oh, a coworker? Now, that was interesting. The officer didn't even blink. He just looked at her, then at the guy still standing awkwardly by the car, then back at me. His silence said everything. I could have left it at that. I could have walked away and let her keep talking, let her dig herself even deeper. But I didn't. Because now I wanted her to feel the exact same humiliation I was feeling. So I turned to the guy, looked him up and down, memorized his face, his messy hair, the panicked sweat on his forehead. Then, in the calmest voice I could manage, I asked, "What's his name, Rachel?" She blinked. Her mouth opened, then closed. Silence. A few seconds stretched into something unbearable. Then the officer let out a short, humorless laugh. Yeah, that's what I thought. I didn't say another word. I didn't need to. She had already lost. Rachel's face crumpled. She knew it was over. The officer turned back to his report, uninterested now that the situation had gone from traffic accident to domestic disaster. But the people watching, the bystanders, the paramedics, the curious faces standing just far enough away to not look nosy but close enough to hear, they were eating this up. Rachel wasn't just a cheater anymore. She was a public spectacle. And me? I was just getting started. Rachel's face was pale, her lips slightly parted, her hands clenched into tight fists at her sides. She didn't say his name. She couldn't. Because in that moment, she realized something important. It didn't matter what excuse she gave. It didn't matter if she called him a coworker, a friend, a stranger she just happened to give a ride to. None of it would make a difference. Because I wasn't looking for an explanation. I was looking for the truth. And the truth? It was already standing right in front of me, with his belt undone and guilt painted all over his face. The officer didn't push her for an answer. He didn't have to. The silence was loud enough. The tension thickened, stretching between us like a wire pulled so tight it was about to snap. I could feel the weight of all the eyes on us. The paramedics, the bystanders, the other drivers caught in the traffic Rachel had single-handedly caused. They were all watching, all waiting to see what would happen next. And then, the guy, Mystery Man, Mr. Half-Dressed, the coward who had been standing there like a useless prop this entire time, finally decided to open his mouth. Look, I think we should all just calm down. Wrong move. The words barely left his mouth before I turned to him, and every ounce of restraint I had left evaporated. Calm down? My voice was calm, too calm. That kind of calm that comes right before something explosive. You're standing here in my wife's car, with your pants barely holding onto your waist, after she wrecked it in the middle of the street. And you think I should calm down? The officer stepped in slightly, probably sensing the way my hands curled into fists, but I wasn't going to hit him. Not yet. Because I wanted something worse than a broken nose. I wanted the truth. So I turned back to Rachel, the woman I had loved, the woman I had trusted, the woman who now looked more like a stranger than the person I had built my life with. How long? Rachel flinched like the words had physically hit her. What? How long? My voice was sharp now, cutting through the air like a blade. If she was going to humiliate me, if she was going to destroy our marriage, then she was going to do it out loud, in public, in front of all these people who had no choice but to bear witness. She swallowed, her gaze flickering between me and the officer, probably hoping someone would step in and stop this. No one did. And then, quietly, barely above a whisper, she muttered, "A few months." Liar. Because no one wrecks their life for a few months. No one panics that much. No one looks that guilty over something that was just a fling. This wasn't new. I took a deep breath, felt the last bit of patience I had left drain out of me, and smiled. Not the kind of smile you give when you're happy, the kind of smile you give when you're about to burn everything down. You know what? That's fine, I said. Because in a few hours, you won't have a husband. You won't have a house. And judging by the way this idiot is sweating, I'm guessing you won't even have him either. Rachel's eyes widened. What does that mean? It meant that she had no idea what I had already done. Because while she was out, working late, all those nights, while she was sneaking around, laughing behind my back, I had been paying attention. I might not have known all the details before now, but I knew enough to be prepared. And Rachel? She was about to lose everything. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and tapped a few buttons. Then, I turned the screen toward her. She looked down, and her face went completely blank, because staring back at her was an email confirmation from my lawyer. A divorce filing, already submitted. Rachel sucked in a sharp breath. Wait, you don't have to. But I was already done. Don't have to what? I interrupted, shaking my head. Don't have to leave you? Don't have to end a marriage you already threw away? Don't have to protect what's mine while you're off wrecking cars and playing house with some idiot who couldn't even keep his pants zipped? Rachel looked ready to cry now. Good. She should cry. She should feel every single ounce of what she had just lost. But the best part? I wasn't even finished. Because the divorce? That was just the beginning. I turned my attention back to Mr. Homewrecker, who had been suspiciously quiet since I pulled out my phone. And now, I was about to take away his happy little fantasy too. You married? I asked. He blinked, like a man who had just realized he had walked directly into a burning building with no exit. Then, before he could answer, I held up my phone again. Because while he was busy ruining my life, I had been doing a little research, and what I found was his wife's number. Rachel let out a tiny, broken sound. Mr. Homewrecker paled. And then, I pressed call. Hey, I said as soon as a woman picked up on the other end. You don't know me, but I think you should know that your husband was just in a car accident with my wife. And judging by his belt situation, I don't think it was work-related. Rachel gasped. Mr. Homewrecker made a choked noise. But me? I walked away. Because this wasn't my problem anymore. This was theirs. I walked away, but I wasn't finished. Not even close. Rachel and Mr. Homewrecker had just gotten their first taste of what happens when you destroy something you were never meant to touch. But now it was time for them to choke on the fallout. I didn't rush. I didn't scream. I let them stew. Let them feel the weight of what had just happened. Let them stand there in the wreckage of Rachel's car, knowing that their lives were about to spiral faster than they ever could have imagined. As I walked back to my own car, I could hear Rachel's voice, high, frantic, pleading, but it wasn't directed at me anymore. No, she had turned to him, to the man she had risked everything for, the man who was now staring at me like he had just realized his entire world was about to collapse. And he was right. Because his wife picked up the phone. I didn't stay to hear the details of that conversation, but I didn't need to. I could picture it perfectly. The confusion, the disbelief, the moment when his wife's stomach dropped as she processed exactly what I was telling her. And then, the rage, the questions, the realization that the man she thought she knew had been sneaking around, lying, cheating, wrecking a marriage they had probably spent years building. And just like that, his perfect little life was over. But I wasn't done with Rachel yet. I drove home, heart steady, mind sharp, already moving on to the next phase of destruction. Because Rachel hadn't just betrayed me. She had done it so carelessly, so arrogantly, so completely convinced that she would never get caught. She had made me feel like I was crazy for doubting her. She had built an entire secret life and laughed behind my back while doing it. And now? Now it was time to take everything from her. The house? Mine. The divorce was already filed, and since the mortgage was solely in my name, Rachel had exactly 30 days to pack her things and figure out where she was going to live next. The joint accounts? Already drained. I had moved my money out weeks ago when I first got suspicious. The car? Well, that problem had solved itself, hadn't it? Too bad she crashed it before she could even realize I had already removed her from the insurance policy. Then came the job. Rachel worked for a prestigious event planning company, one that catered to high-profile clients, celebrity weddings, multi-million-dollar galas. Reputation was everything. And guess what doesn't look good in an industry built on trust? A very public cheating scandal. So I made sure they knew. I sent an email to her boss, complete with pictures from the accident, a full explanation of what had happened, and a polite inquiry about whether this was the kind of professionalism they expected from their executives. And then, I sat back and let it all unravel. By the time Rachel finally dragged herself home, her phone was ringing off the hook. Her boss, her coworkers, her friends, all getting a front row seat to the mess she had created. She stormed into the house like she was ready to fight, but I was already 2 steps ahead. Her stuff? Packed. Divorce papers? Waiting on the kitchen counter. Her email? Locked out. And when she finally opened her mouth to speak, to try to defend herself, to try to make some pathetic last-minute attempt at controlling the damage, I simply held up my phone one more time. An email. From her boss. Fired. Rachel broke right there. She collapsed onto the couch, hands shaking, eyes darting around like she was trying to figure out how this had all gone so wrong so fast. 1 minute, she was living her fantasy life, sneaking around, thinking she was untouchable. The next, she had no husband, no house, no money, no job, and nowhere to go. I didn't say anything. I just watched. Watched as she tried to breathe through the reality she had created. Watched as she finally understood what it felt like to lose everything. And the best part? I hadn't even raised my voice. I just let the truth do all the work. Because the thing about people like Rachel, they never expect the consequences. They think they're too smart, too careful, too untouchable. But in the end, she was just another cheater. And now, she had to live with that. Rachel sat on the couch, completely still, her eyes darting from the divorce papers on the counter to the boxes of her things already packed and waiting by the door. She looked hollow. The reality had finally caught up to her. She had spent months, maybe even years, thinking she was the smartest person in the room, that she could have it all. But now, she had nothing. I didn't rush her. I let her sit there, let the silence settle in, let her truly absorb just how much she had lost. She didn't cry. Not at first. No, she just sat there, breathing heavily, gripping the couch cushion like she was trying to hold on to something, anything, that was still stable in her world. But the truth was, there was nothing left for her to hold on to. She had thrown it all away. And now, she had to live with it. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she broke. Her shoulders started shaking, her breath hitched, and then, just like that, the floodgates opened. Full, uncontrollable sobs, the kind that shake a person to their core. She buried her face in her hands, muttering something I couldn't quite make out, but I already knew what it was. Regret. Because cheaters? They never expect to lose. They think they can have everything. The stability of a loyal partner, the excitement of a secret lover, The thrill of deception without the cost. They think they're too smart to get caught, too charming to be left, too essential to be replaced. Until they aren't. And Rachel? She wasn't special. She wasn't some exception to the rule. She wasn't untouchable. She was just another person who thought she could play with fire and never get burned. And now? She was standing in the ashes. She finally lifted her head, her eyes red and swollen, her face twisted in desperation. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely holding together. "I messed up. I don't know who I am without you." And that right there, was the most pathetic thing I had ever heard. Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "I wish I could take it back." No, she wasn't mourning losing me. She was mourning losing her safety net. I stared at her for a long moment, and then I did something she never expected. I smiled. Because for the first time in years, maybe even since we got married, I felt truly, completely free. "No," I said simply, standing up. "You don't know who you are without someone taking care of you." She flinched like I had slapped her, but I wasn't done. "You had everything," I continued. "A home, a husband, a life. And you threw it away for what? A guy who bolted the second things got messy? A guy who, right now, is probably begging his wife not to leave him?" She didn't respond. Because there was nothing left to say. I picked up my keys, grabbed my jacket, and walked to the door. Rachel sat there, watching me, silent. Maybe she wanted to scream. Maybe she wanted to beg. Maybe she finally realized just how badly she had destroyed her own life. I opened the door, stepped outside, and without looking back, I closed it behind me. I didn't need to see what happened next. That was her story now. Because me? I had already won. Rachel would have to live with the fact that I was gone forever. And I would never think about her again,